Hello to all the debt warriors listening, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie Fata. Last month on the podcast, I was joined by veteran Karl Martin. We discussed different aspects of military finances, and Karl even provided some great financial tips of his own for military members. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'll link that episode in the description of this podcast so you can listen to that there. On today's episode, I'll be joined by Karl again to continue the discussion on military finances. Karl and I will be discussing preparing financially before leaving for active deployment, college opportunities for service members, permanent change of station, and much more. Now let's get to part 2 of my interview with Karl. Hi, Karl. Thanks for joining me again on another podcast episode.
Hey, Katie. Thanks.
We still have so much to talk about military finances. So let's get to it. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So if a military member is preparing to be deployed, what should they take care of financially before leaving for active deployment?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I would say, yeah, there's just a ton. I would say that probably, it kind of depends on the status, if they're married or they're single.
Right.
So I would say, if they're single, the things they need to kind of consider with their finances is, giving a power of attorney is number one to somebody they trust, typically a parent, and make sure that it's something, it's not a general power of attorney that essentially gives them all power. I have seen some really, really bad situations with military members where they're coming back from deployment and their bank account is drained. Yes. Oh, yeah. So power of attorney is number one. They also have to make sure they have a will, which is almost a requirement for going on deployment. And then obviously take in consideration their vehicle payments. So I know with the there's certain credit cards, cars, and certain debts that you have. The Service Member Civil Relief Act will allow them to put those on freeze to include college debts, things like that, while they're on deployment. So that's what I would say probably for a single service member. Married, obviously, 10 times that, right? You have a spouse, you have children, you have to make sure that your will is up to date with all that stuff. Making sure that that your spouse is aware of bills, where everything's coming from. They have access to your bank account. Understanding that when you're on deployment, also there's going to be additional incentives and additional money coming in, just because if you're on the ship or you're overseas somewhere, some locations, if they are considered hostile locations, it's tax free. It's a combat zone is considered tax free, right? So that's going to raise your income. So they have to be prepared to handle that additional income that's coming in. So
yeah, definitely. So it's really important to prepare your finances before deploying. Like you mentioned, power of attorney, will, everything like that. You kind of mentioned this here. I want to talk about this here. Do you think you can go more into the Service Member Civil Relief Act? You kind of touched on it.
Yeah. So the Service Member Civil Relief Act is essentially, from what I know about it, it's a law that protects service members, right? So a couple things that were put into play that I've had experience with is, I think back in 2019, they adjusted it to where percentage rate, APR, on a purchase, like a vehicle, right? Things like that, or credit cards, cannot be above 6%.
Okay.
For service members. It allows military members who have a lease in an apartment or a house to break the lease if they are ordered overseas, or if they have orders to PCS to another location. The landlord cannot punish them or give them any type of early termination fees. In particular, in accordance with the Service Member Civil Relief Act. And off the top of my head, there's many more, but really it's to help our service members, in those in the circumstances where they have to move, right? They have to go somewhere. They're being ordered literally to go somewhere else. I also know for our reservists, one of the common things with our reservists that the Service Member Civil Relief Act covers, I think it falls under this, where if they are in reserve orders and they get ordered to deploy or go to augment over to active duty, their job is protected, which is a unique thing, right? So they can, wherever they're working at the time, they can, if they're or it's active duty, then their job will be essentially there for them when they get back.
Yeah. No, that's good to know that there's some protection for them, you know, if before, you know, if they have to be deployed
Yeah.
or anything. So we also talked about a power of attorney and a will before they get deployed. Should they also have a living will? Is that the same thing?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
When I was in the military, I had a living will.
Right.
Essentially, should anything, happen to me, this is where all my stuff is, right? I have safety deposit box, or if you have a safe in your house, right, this is where I would put my will. And this is what
Right.
essentially I want to have happen.
Uh-huh.
That's really the extent of
Yeah.
what I
Yeah,
did
no,
at the
definitely.
time. Yeah,
Yeah, you know, and it's also good to let your family members know where everything is before you leave as well, so they're aware.
exactly,
You know, that's super
exactly,
important. So,
exactly.
what about
Yep.
service members group life insurance? Do you know what that is? Would you be able to
Mhm.
explain it for the listeners?
Yeah, SGLI is what
Hmm.
I know it
Okay.
as. So our SGLI is essentially, it's a life insurance policy
Okay.
for for active duty military. Should God forbid anything ever happen to you, and you you perish, it's essentially a life insurance policy, and I think it's $400,000 is the SGLI, and then there's also a death gratuity that is on top of that is, I think, is $100,000. So a total, life insurance policy of about is $500,000 is what I'm remembering. And so, yeah, and so that is something that's really, really important. And that brings up a good point about another thing you need to make sure that you keep updated. That is something you can update online or with your administrative office. I have had really, really bad situations. Unfortunately, a friend of mine passed away, and he had never changed his SGLI
Oh,
insurance policy to his ex-girlfriend.
oh no. Oh, no.
And so he unfortunately he passed. And so when it came down to him being paid out, they had to contact her and say, "Hey, this money is for you." He had already been with another woman, like he's already started a
Yeah.
new life with another partner. So
Uh-huh.
it was a really big
Oh my
mess, and it was a
goodness.
whole lot. And yeah, it's not great.
Yeah. So definitely keep that updated. And then I have kind of a follow-up question to that.
Yes.
So is that
Mhm.
automatically deducted from your pay? Or do you have
Yes.
to, you don't have to
Yes.
opt into it, kind of like not like the retirement plan? That's automatically just taken out?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So and your administrative offices, they'll do an audit with you
Uh-huh.
usually yearly, and
Right.
they'll go ahead and, hey, is there any changes to this? If you're married, it'll automatically typically go to your spouse. But
Hmm.
if you want to allocate it to your children, you can split it between your children, 50 here, 50 here. You can put stipulations usually in your will for, I want this to be paid out, but they can't access it until they graduate college. I mean, you can do all
Hmm.
kinds of cool stuff with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an annual audit that you can put in for your typically your administrative office is going to make you do.
Right. Okay, got it. That's good. And
Yeah.
definitely keep it up to date for
Keep
sure.
it up to date. Yes.
Definitely. So,
Yes.
what about financial resources available for service members who'd like to attend college?
Oh my goodness, this is my jam right here. So, yes, so I am a big fan of service members getting their college degrees.
Right.
I got my bachelor's degree while I was on active duty.
Okay.
They give 100% tuition assistance
Okay.
while you're on active duty, up to $4,500 a year.
Okay.
Now, doesn't seem like a whole lot,
Yeah.
but in reality, a full-time service member who has a full-time job is not going to be able to go to full-time college as well.
Right.
And so what typically with a plan that I lay out for a lot of my military members when I'm talking to them is, when you come in, get acquainted with the military about a year. You have 3 years left. You're going to get opportunities to go to schools. Take those opportunities, because a lot of colleges nowadays will give you credits for the military training you've already gone through. And so for me, for example, I went about 10 years in before I started taking college. And when I applied to the college, they had essentially given me 59 college credits from what I
Oh,
had done in the
wow.
military. Yeah. So I was able to take one or two classes in the evenings, just
Hmm.
daily, on a weekly basis. And I would take my classes. And in 23 months after starting, I got my bachelor's degree,
Okay.
and it was
Yeah.
100% paid for.
Oh.
Then there's opportunities for afterwards when you get out of the military as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask like how long does it take, to finish? So you said 23 months for yourself. I mean, if you went in with 59 credits, you're already halfway there, which is
I'm halfway
awesome.
there. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So it doesn't take you terribly to it probably wouldn't take you too long to finish. So definitely take advantage of that, I'd say too.
Yes, it's a great opportunity, and
Hmm.
it's typically debt free. It's typically debt free, and
Yeah.
then you have this great big beautiful post 9/11 GI Bill that's waiting for you to get out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's exactly what I was going to ask you next. Is there an opportunity to pass that on, the post 9/11 GI Bill, to dependents, help them pay for their college and maybe avoid student loans?
Yes, I'm actually doing it myself right
Oh,
now. My
okay.
son is graduating high school here this year,
Hmm.
and he's going to the University of Tennessee,
Uh-huh.
Knoxville. And I will be passing, I've already transferred my post 9/11 GI Bill benefits to my kids.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that is the stipulation with that is you have to agree, once you opt into it, you have to agree to do an additional 4 years in the military
Hmm.
to be qualified for that. And so a lot of service members, right, they're thinking about getting out of the military. They're like, oh, you know, I'm going to pass my GI Bill over to my kids, but then they realize, oh, I have to do another 4 years. But
Hmm.
that's besides the point. But no, my son, he's going to be doing. Each of my kids are going to be basically getting half of my post 9/11 GI Bill. So
Oh.
they'll be able to go to school for free for about 2 years.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a
Yeah.
huge done. Especially, you can definitely avoid some student loans that way. Especially if you
Yes.
or whoever had savings for their kids
Yep.
already, like a college savings fund, they could avoid student loans entirely. Even.
Yes. Yes. And both
Wow,
my
that's
kids
great.
both have 529s
Oh,
set up
that's
for them.
great. Yeah.
Yep. My dad set those up for them earlier on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've definitely talked about 529 accounts before, so I will link a more detailed description to that in the description of this podcast. They are really great, so that's great for
Yes.
them. Yeah.
Yes.
So, we're going to talk a little bit more about military finances. So,
Hmm.
active military members have reported concerns over finances that 41% considered spousal unemployment or underemployment a major source of stress. So, how can military spouses provide financially with the unstable life?
Yeah, so that is that's definitely a touchy subject. I know for a
Yeah.
lot of spouses out there,
Hmm.
and it's unfortunate. It really is because every 2 to 3 years you're having an uproot, right? So if you have a
Right.
certification, a license in this state, you got to move to another state. The license is irrelevant, and so
Mm.
it is really difficult for a lot of our spouses to be able to, you know, not that they can't maintain a job, but it's hard to kind of uproot and move to another place and then find another job.
Right.
Now, luckily, there are, resources for a lot of our spouses out there. I know that there are education resources. You can pass your post 9/11 GI Bill over to your spouse if
Oh, okay.
he or she wants to take advantage of it.
Hmm.
Um, but it's an issue. But
Yeah.
there are great resources out there. People just need to Google, right? There's spouse scholarship opportunities that allow them to get certified in tech schools, or if they want to get their I know my wife was really interested for a while on what is it, ultrasound, right?
Okay.
We do the ultrasound, things
Yeah.
like that, right? So there's a ton of resources out there for spouses, but
Yeah.
obviously moving every 2 years, 3 years, it definitely puts a damper on it.
Yeah, the moving definitely does. But I'm just wondering now, since, COVID and everything, a lot more remote work has popped up. Do you think that helps them a little bit?
Yes, most
Yeah.
most definitely, most definitely. I think definitely being able to do remote is definitely an option out there.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many resources,
Yeah.
on that note though, and I keep talking about
Hmm.
these resources, but it can become overwhelming with the amount of resources that are available for a lot of military members, and so they need a place to go, both active and retired or veterans. They need a place to go where they can find this information.
Hmm.
um, hey, what is everybody using? Or what is a great resource for this one? This is what I'm looking for, a forum. And there's websites out there. I know I'm a big, we use Veteran Life, right? that's
Hmm.
that's our big
Yeah.
community page. We use Veteran Life a whole lot about helping our military look for what's available for them, spouses
Yeah.
included.
Yeah. And I will, of course, link Better in Life too in the description of this
Yeah,
podcast so people can get that there as well.
a great place.
So, this is also for people in the real world, but not having, and like, an average person too, if they don't have childcare, they might not be able to work as well. So, how
Mhm.
can military families budget for expensive childcare?
Oh my goodness, that is the catch 22, because typically what you'll find is a spouse will get a job And unfortunately, the amount that he or she is paying, that the family is paying for childcare,
Right.
basically cuts out what they're bringing in per month.
Right. And that's the
Right.
same for, average people too. It's
Right.
crazy. So
It's
this will be a
insane.
good question for anyone.
Yeah, it's a great. So
Yeah.
luckily for the military, we have a great program out there. I think it used to be called NACRA, but now
Mhm.
it's called Child Care Aware,
Okay.
and it is a great resource for service members to. It's a subsidy to help childcare. Right, they can go on there,
Mhm.
they can apply online, and as long as the spouse is in the process of looking for work, they will essentially it basically cuts the childcare bill in half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great resource. So they have to be in the process of looking or actually have a job, right, to qualify?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that
Yep.
makes sense. And that will definitely help financially. I mean, in general, it's hard to find childcare. I can
Oh
imagine,
yeah.
especially for someone in the military, if they don't have family near, it could make it even harder.
Oh yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes, and that's typically what you're going to find, right? I mean, they're
Mhm.
uprooted from their home, and they don't have anybody near them, and
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, well, that's talk about resources. That's another great resource as well for them. So in the last episode, we kind of talked about permanent changes station, but I kind of want to talk about it
yeah,
more. So what is it if people don't remember, and does it make it easier for military families financially or harder? What do you think?
I would definitely say it's harder on the
Harder.
family. Yes,
Yeah.
the example that I gave in the last episode
Yeah.
was I talked about moving from Phoenix, Arizona, where I was stationed,
Right.
where I was in a 3,000 square foot home, moving to San Diego, where I was in a 1,200 square foot home
Mm-hmm.
in an extremely expensive area for cost of living. And so that is definitely something that military members need to budget for and be prepared for. Uh, typically, and this is just a random stat from what I remember hearing from somebody, was typically a service member and their family will spend about $5,000 in debt just trying to move to the next duty station, every duty station.
Mm-hmm.
And that's substantial, right? Because typically what you're doing is you're upfront in costs on when you're moving into a new home, right? You got to get resource, right? Broom, mop, buy new furniture. There's a bunch
Right.
of things you need to buy, right? Gas, traveling across the country, moving your vehicles. If there's a lot of expenses that go into to changing duty stations. And then I mentioned in the last episode about how to move from Northern California and Lake Tahoe, where it was snows a bunch, and then getting a 4-wheel drive vehicle that was an absolute necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute necessity. So I had to go buy a brand new vehicle. I didn't have to
Mm-hmm.
buy a brand new one, but um, I had to. It was like a necessity that you have to do. So planning for a permanent change of station is very important. Realizing where you're going and what's available for you.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this. So we talked about how it a permanent change of station can affect military families' housing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you make a great point too. I mean, if you're just moving from one house in your town to another, it's expensive. But if you're moving
Right.
to a completely different part of the country, there are other factors that add cost as
That you've
well.
never been to as well.
Exactly. Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You've
exactly,
never even been to this
exactly.
city before or this state. You don't know the tax code. You don't know what's going
That's true.
on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, you're having to find a resource to figure out what business is that I can work with that are military trusted. And I love work where I work the mine side because it gives service members an opportunity to be able to see what are trusted businesses in the area. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And talking about housing, military housing. So
mhm.
overall, how would you say military members are affected by housing?
And what do you mean?
Just like in general, moving and we kind of actually talked about this earlier. So
Mhm.
when you move, what happens to the house? Do you have to sell it? How does that work and everything as well?
Right. Yeah. So if you're so there's on base housing and then obviously if you
Right.
off base housing. So on base housing, it's pretty simple, right? They take all your BAH, your basic allowance for housing. They take all that every single month. So your only obligation is really just to make sure you paint the walls back to the original color, make sure there's no major damage, and then you leave, and then they'll turn it over for the next person. Um, Living off base, obviously you're responsible for all that stuff. So, if buying a home, now you have to sell the home, right? You got to find a trusted realtor. You got to find a trusted broker. When I moved to Nashville, I bought my home that I'm in right now,
Uh-huh.
sight unseen, because obviously I can't travel. I was living in San Diego and I couldn't go back and forth between here and Nashville. Just
Yeah.
financially, just wasn't feasible. And so I bought a home sight unseen. And I think we moved in July of 2019, and the air conditioning had blown out
Mm.
while after we had bought the home. And so we
Yeah.
walked in, it was 90 something degrees in there. So these are the things that you have to be prepared for. And we had to spend, I think it was $13,000 on a new air conditioning unit, just moving
Yeah.
into a brand new home.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So you definitely have to financially prepare for that.
Yes.
How
Yes.
can you financially prepare for that? Do you recommend like a savings, but how saving each month? What are ways military members can prepare financially in terms of housing?
Now they do. There's certain allowances that
Mm-hmm.
they give. There's something called the dislocation allowance.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're leaving from one place to the next. I think it's about $3,500. It's just an upfront, you know, cost that they or allowance that they give you to help offset the cost of any moving expenses. But really, just once you get those orders, typically you have about 6 months to
Oh,
move. 3 to
okay.
6 months is all you have to prepare.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a savings account, it's time to get serious. You really need to start kind of buckling down and instead of maybe planning the summer vacation, maybe we plan a vacation in the winter, right? You putting that money aside so that you can really prepare for the PCS in case things like an air conditioning unit
Mm.
not working or come in your future.
Yeah, no, that's definitely some great tips on, how preparing for housing financially in the military. And I think we've covered every topic that I needed to ask questions about for military finances. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh my goodness. I would just say, as a military person, you're right.
Mhm.
I mean, once you get out of the military, there's so many, you almost feel like, and the example that I give people is if you've ever seen that movie Shawshank Redemption,
Mhm.
where the old guy leaves the prison,
Yeah.
right? And he's just kind of lost in the world. A
Mhm.
lot of our service members, they just need a great resource, a great, somebody just who can take care of them. And they're out there, right? The community pages are out there. Veteran Life's a great one, right? And we always looking for, companies like you guys who are interested in helping our military and taking care of them.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah. And if you are struggling with debt in the military or out of the military, you're a veteran, you can, of course, reach out to Navicor for help. And, we can set you up with a budget or, have you enroll into a debt management plan and all that. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for 2 episodes of the podcast. I think they went great.
thanks, Katie. Appreciate it.
I've learned so much these past 2 episodes chatting with Karl about different aspects of military finances. Before being deployed, it's crucial to get prepared financially. You'll want to make sure someone you trust has access to your bank account in case of emergencies. Make sure you've paid off your debt and your credit score is in good shape before you leave. You'll also want to have your power of attorney and will prepared in case anything happens. If you're a service member, take the opportunity to go to college. You'll be going into college with some college credits because of your military status. Like Karl, you could be going in with so many credits that you're already halfway done. There's also an opportunity to pass on the post 9/11 GI Bill off to your dependents. This will set your children up to have little to no student loans after they attend college. Just remember, if you're planning on doing this, you have to agree to an additional 4 years of service. If you're a military spouse, there are resources out there that can help you find work. Veteran Life is an example of a resource military spouses can use to find work. They also provide information on veteran benefits, military retirement, military discounts, and much more. So I'll be linking Veteran Life in the description of this podcast as well. If you're concerned you can't work because you don't have any childcare, apply to Childcare Aware. They'll help you obtain affordable childcare if your spouse is working or in the process of looking for work. Moving all the time proves to be a financial struggle for many members of the military. Once they move, they have to figure out their new tax code, furnish their new house, and maybe even have to buy a new vehicle fit for their new location. It's important for service members to prepare their budget for their new living arrangements in case they're significantly more expensive than their old ones. So before I end this episode, I want to thank Karl for his service and taking the time to join me for 2 important podcast episodes. With that being said, that wraps up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us there. I'll talk to you next time, Millennials, Gen Zers, and everyone else listening. Bye.